Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Jack. Beta is finally here, and now that the disconnects are over, hopefully, I wanted to give my thoughts on all of the healers so far because the tier sets are released, all the hero talents are released, and we get to spam as much dungeons as we like. We are only able to do heroic dungeons, but we also have the trinkets on hand for the raids and for the dungeon pools so far. So I wanted to give my overall thoughts, and let's start it off with Holy Priest. The 2 set is making Serendipity, which is of course your holy word effects, the additional cooldown reduction you get for casting Flash Heal or Prayer of Healing, all of those things. It is 10% more effective. So when you cast a Flash Heal, usually you get 6 seconds off from your Serenity cooldown, and now it's going to be that 10% more effective, so fractions of a second. The 4th set is Heal, Flash Heal, and Prayer of Healing have a 50% chance to cast again at 35% effectiveness, and of course that reflects as well in the cooldown reduction for your holy words. So sometimes you're getting like 6.5 seconds or so of cooldown reduction, and sometimes you're getting, I think it's like 11 or 12-ish seconds of cooldown reduction for that respective holy word that you're casting. And so as a result, you're not getting as many holy words as you previously were from the Emir Drasil tier set, where you're not consuming charges when you were spending them, but it is pretty noticeable that you're generating a good amount of them in the process. As a result, I feel like Holy's not really struggling too much when healing these dungeons, and so far in beta, it seems like they're pretty highly tuned both with healing and in their damage. So you can actually crank crazy amounts of damage if you were really trying. I wasn't really trying to prioritize that in dungeons, since we only have heroic dungeons on hand. I was just kind of wanting to see what mobs were going to be doing, if they were going to live long enough, of course, which is a bit of a challenge. But I did really enjoy playing Lightweaver so far, and playing with this slightly stronger heal casts to be able to top off my allies. And I felt like there weren't too many areas where I was really struggling with my healer output. I think there's a couple bugs at the moment where like the Surge of Light procs that you generate from Archon Priest are actually costing you mana, and so it felt a little bit easier to run out of mana more rapidly as a result of that. But once that bug gets fixed, and I'm sure there's a couple other bugs on hand, it won't be too big of a deal. And that was the talent that I was really liking. Keep in mind, they also buffed Divine Hymn so that it's 400% stronger in a 5-man environment. It felt okay, but it wasn't really forcing health pools up like crazy or anything like that. So I'm not too convinced that we're really going to run with it, but I mean, at least it's something that's going to work decently well as we're going into it. For Disc Priest, your 2-set bonus is increasing Atonement Healing by 5%. The 4-piece is Smite and Penance is increasing the damage of your next Mind Blast or the Absorb of your next Powered Shield. The Mind Blast stacks up to 75%, so there's 3 stacks you can get for it, and the shield is going to be 45% increased in its value. This one, it feels kind of odd, really. I don't have any problem taking advantage of that Mind Blast buff. It feels really weird that it's Mind Blast's damage and Powered Shields absorb. I really don't like that aspect, because most of the time I just want to be utilizing it specifically for the Mind Blast, and it feels like the 4 set having some of that power in mind where you want to like cast some smites and penances and then use the shield on the tank or somebody else for the extra absorb value if they're taking some damage isn't really what the spec is kind of going for. I think the biggest thing that really stood out when I was playing dungeons so far is that the spec feels a little underpowered compared to some of the other peers that I've played with thus far. And I think part of that is just naturally like tuning, but I also think that they're sort of expecting more output out of that shield, that you're going to be using shield almost on cooldown in a dungeon environment or something, and that really just isn't the case whatsoever. The revamped Rapture feels pretty good, but you're also using it in a very similar way as you already were on live servers, that is using it before you actually engage with the pull, before you actually engage with whatever damage event is happening at the moment. So I don't really feel like the 4 set feels strong having that power tied into Powered Shield. I'd much rather it be only focused on Mind Blast and either increasing the 2 set value or increasing the Mind Blast stack value or something like that to be able to compensate. At the moment, I don't really see any reason why either in raids or M+ you'd really want to be like casting the smites and then playing around the shield, and then casting the smites and playing around the shield. I just don't really like that whatsoever. I'd much prefer it only be focused into the Mind Blast damage, and I think that would solve a lot of problems with the potential ramp scenarios where you want to make sure you have a really powerful Mind Blast, but you don't want to be using shield because it would potentially hinder your upfront damage for a raid ramp. We haven't seen that issue pop up yet because there's not raid testing yet, but it's something that's just kind of lingering and it's just about to happen and about to be experienced. So I really hope that they get rid of the shield interaction in its entirety. I do also think the spec kind of needs to have some attention given to Void Summoner's cooldown reduction, because when I'm playing with Void Weaver, the hero talent setup, it feels quite nice to be able to leverage, but it's a little odd not having as like a large amount of that Shadow Covenant uptime, unfortunately. Before we continue, I want to give a huge thank you to our sponsor for this video, boot.dev. They have built an amazing site to teach you both Python and Go's programming languages from start to finish in an immense and immersive RPG game that is online and self-paced. And just like every class in World of Warcraft, it gets you learning by doing. From the very beginning, you are writing a ton of code, getting your hands on the keyboard, and shipping projects. They have XP levels, achievements, and quests that you can complete to better track your progress and compete with others on their global leaderboard. They believe in their products so much that they have each of the modules open in a guest mode for you to read and watch through. And if you join in with a membership, it unlocks the interactivity and the game that goes through it to make it that much easier for you to learn along the way. Whether you're looking to enhance your skills or try something new or take on this full new journey, make sure you use our code AutomaticJak to get 25% off your first month or your first year, depending on the subscription that you choose. Huge thank you to boot.dev for sponsoring our video, and let's continue. Next up, let's talk about Resto Shaman. Their two-piece is increasing the healing of the affected spells of tidal waves by 10%, which is, of course, Surge, Healing Wave, Chain Heal, and the 4-set is tidal waves being 80% more effective and reduces the mana cost of those spells by 8%. So you're having a discounted cost to your chain heals, basically, because chain heal just hard carries the spec at the moment. I was playing both Farseer and Totem Shaman, and I gotta tell you, I freaking love where Totem Shaman is for the spec. The amount of power that you get from not only just not having to cast Healing Rain every 10 seconds, but also, I got the suggestion from my chat to try using Healing Stream Totem instead of Cloudburst, and it's so much more noticeable. I think it's the shorter cooldown partially, but the extra chain heals that Totem Shaman gives you when you're deploying your Healing Stream Totem, I think it also works. It does work with Cloudburst. I think it's Mana Tide, Spirit Link, and Healing Tide Totem as well that also deploy those free chain heals. Those full strength chain heals are also consuming Tidebringer, High Tide, Tidal Waves, that are taking all of those buffs. And so you don't actually have as much GCDs that you have to dedicate to those chain heal casts to make sure you're getting all that value. It's sort of automatically casting for you, consuming those tidal wave buffs, consuming all those other side buffs to crank out large amounts of healing, and it's not costing you the mana. So not only is your 4-set reducing the cost of any chain heals that you might cast, but you're also not having to cast as many chain heals because the totems that you're already going to use anyway are doing it for you. So I think Totem Shaman has really super grown on me because it's convenient, yes, but it's also opening up even more GCDs by rolling in these chain heals into the totems you're casting anyway. And so as a result, it actually feels like I have time to maintain Flame Shock on targets, or I have time to cast Chain Lightnings onto enemies that I didn't really feel like I could before. And obviously I don't play tons of Shaman, but the more I got comfortable with it, the more I could just kind of feel the spec sort of speed up for me. And the more it felt easier to really make the most of the kit on hand, think through what totems I wanted to use, whether it's something for utility or for just damage, and adding more damage into the equation. Resto Shaman has really been growing onto me. And while the set bonus isn't anything crazy flashy, I think it's really what the spec needs. Because in my last testing for Season 4 PTR, I felt like I really had to worry about my mana all the time, and I did not get that impression whatsoever throughout my testing on beta in the War Within so far. For Resto Druid, your 2-set is buffing Regrowth, Wild Growth, and Swiftman healing by 10%, and your 4-set bonus is your healing is increased by 8% when consuming Soul of the Forest bonus, and for 6 seconds after. So keep in mind, Soul of the Forest is after you are casting your Swiftmen, you're getting the buff towards your next heal. Usually people are using it into their Wild Growth, but there's also a new talent for the War Within. I mean, I guess it technically goes back to, I think, BFA, when you had 2 charges of Swiftmend. And so the talent Prosperity in the War Within gives you those 2 charges of Swiftmend, and I feel like it really synergizes so well with the set bonus you have on hand. And the more that I was playing with my druid setup, regardless of which hero talent, since it didn't feel like in dungeons either hero talent really like changed a lot of my decision making or made me feel like any sort of different. I think the biggest mistake I made when I was testing was I was not running rampant growth, which is giving your regrowth hots to both of your life bloom targets. I wasn't running that, and I really regretted it because I felt like with double charge of Swiftmend, I just had so many casts that I could sort of utilize for Swiftmend to then get that Soul of the Forest buff, to spend it how I chose, and then get more healing increases on hand. And so while the 2-piece doesn't seem like it's super insane, I really noticed the increased healing out of Swiftmend, and I really felt a lot stronger to be able to like push up and sort of burst up health pools that I didn't really experience as much when I was doing my Resto Druid like 0 to Hero series out in Season 3. So I'm really enjoying where Resto Druid sort of like entire kit is. The Call of the Elder Druid stuff felt really strong and noticeable that I could deploy a couple of Grove Guardians and then just go cat form and start adding DPS, and both of those resources together was really healing most of the low to moderate damage. And then I have Tree of Life on hand and just a massive hots to be able to burst my way through any sort of problems I had. If I had Rampant Growth aligned with Prosperity, like the Grove Guardian sort of setup, Photosynthesis, I think you're just a powerhouse of HPS that you could just smash all over the place. And I really did not miss Adaptive Swarm at all. Mistweaver Monk setup is the 2-piece increase in the healing of Enveloping Mist and Renewing Mist by 10%, and the 4-set Vivify, extending the duration of Renewing Mist and Enveloping Mist on the primary target by 2 seconds up to a total of 4. This set bonus didn't really feel as amazing as some of the other ones on hand. I really noticed it primarily in just the Renewing Mist extensions, but I suppose if tanks were really getting bodied, you might notice a bit more with the Enveloping Mist extensions on hand. Personally, what I really miss was when like tanks did require a decent amount of healing back in like BFA, and you could also have like an unlimited extension out of Rising Mist and keep on extending those envelops to really carry a lot of healing. I don't really get this feeling from here, and we're going to have to see how much output tanks are really going to require, because at least so far in the War Within beta, feels like tanks are incredibly stout and they don't really need a lot of assistance from the healers to just pound output into them. So I felt like I wasn't really taking much advantage of the Enveloping Mist extension, but I think I was really able to take good advantage of the Renewing Mist and constantly sort of have it just rolling out on everybody. I was having the most fun playing with the Conduit of the Celestials build, both in having a large minute-and-a-half cooldown that is probably really overpowered right now, to be fair, but also the like heads up of the procs that I was getting from Angry Dave to cast Enveloping Mists onto the tank and also shield my allies in the process. It really made it easier to be able to use Enveloping Mists regularly when I didn't have like my Celestial up or anything like that. But also it was like noticeable sort of like proc gameplay that I really enjoy having mixed in with Mistweaver's current kit. I think that the talents and the way that they're updating Mistweaver should really be like the standard for all of the healers that we're experiencing, and I'm hoping some of the other healers that we've talked about so far are getting a little bit more love as we're going into beta and Mythic Plus testing a little bit further, but that'll be a video for another time. Overall, Mistweaver is looking great. Even though this tier set feels pretty bland, I think that because the spec tree is so strong, and it has somebody in Blizzard who just has insane love for the spec, and it's very clear in how they're working on it and how they're adding on to it, that I think the spec's going to be totally fine going into the next expansion, even if the tier set isn't the most exciting. Holy Paladin's 2-piece is increasing the healing of your Holy Shock by 10% and its cooldown reduced by 10%, whereas the 4-piece is increasing the initial healing of your next Word of Glory, which would also include the initial healing of Eternal Flame if you're running Herald of the Sun, or Light of Dawn, stacking up to 4 times. So at the moment on beta, Holy Shock just does not hit hard at all. It's healing for just a really small fraction of people's health bars, and a 10% buff and more cooldown reduction for it does not feel great. Even further, your spenders are a little better. I even saw, some slight buffs in Season 4 to the spenders to get them a little bit feeling better, but I think that both Paladin is pretty lowly tuned compared to some of the other healers that I've been playing and doing testing with. I think like Mistweaver, Holy Priest, even Preservation Evoker, all like blast output and can like push up health pools for days, whereas Paladin, I still feel just like Season 4 right now in Dragonflight, just takes a long time to be able to push up health bars. Additionally, it seems like they're kind of trying to like play it super safe in case, there's more caster-oriented playstyle or more like melee wings, since they just had some buffs going in for melee wings with Avenging Crusader not costing holy power anymore and giving you the additional charge of your Crusader strike to benefit from it. That being said, the set bonus feels pretty darn weak, as does the rest of the kit, and it feels like you're just sort of like splitting the difference. I was playing melee wings to test it out in a number of the dungeons, and I was also trying to make sure in between melee wings that I was taking advantage of the crazy output that Infusion of Light is giving your Holy Light, and having your healing like almost double or over double for Holy Light when you have an infusion proc is like so swingy in that you feel super powerful, when you can have those casts or get those casts off quickly, and you can get, a couple instant casts or something like that to pair up when you're using your Tears Deliverance. But boy, does it feel like you are just playing one cooldown to the next, and if you don't have a cooldown up, you're doing absolutely zero healing whatsoever. So I'd be okay if the tier set's not good if they were going to buff up the rest of the kit, but I think we really got to see buffs coming up for the rest of the kit pretty soon. A big bright spot, though, is the hero talents. I think both Herald of the Sun and Lightsmith Paladin are both pretty fun in dungeons. Lightsmith may not be for everybody, but I think it does a good job of being able to provide that support element that people are always interested in, and it feels significant adding those shields into the equation. Whereas Herald of the Sun is just quintessential Lightbringer, Holy Paladin, the vibes, the laser beams that you're spewing out to all your allies feel powerful, are noticeable, and I love having Eternal Flame returning. So the problems are really in the spec tree, not in the hero talents. Now, a lot of people want to have the best for last, but I think this is probably the worst of the healer tier set so far. It is Preservation Evoker, but it's not all bad, okay? Let's start it off. Reversion and Emerald Blossom heal an injured ally within 30 yards for 10% of any amount healing. That's right, it's not within 40 yards, it's 30 yards. Remember the range requirements? The fourth set, Verdant Embrace increases the healing of your next reversion by 200%. This reversion, this super reversion, cannot be echoed. So you're not getting like crazy copies out of like your temporal anomaly, spread echoes, or anything like that. Not happening. I apologize. It is kind of odd having this feeling. I was also running, I think it's called Life Spark, which is the current Season 4 tier set where you're getting the free Living Flames. It's a little odd hitting Verdant Embrace and then having like 3 abilities getting buffed, and you're kind of like looking down the route as to how you want to set up your next GCDs and your next abilities. It kind of caught me early on that I wasn't properly hitting the Verdant Embrace into reversion every single time, and it's not particularly gameplay I love, especially tracking who you or thinking about who you want to like super reversion on hand, because the buff doesn't feel so strong that it has a lot of weight to it either. The extra healing transfer out of the 2-piece felt okay. It's a couple percentage of healing here and there. But I will say the good news is that the spec tree feels so much better to be routing with than the previous iterations that we've seen. And it feels, really satisfying to be able to have both of the hero talents on hand for Evoker. I really like having the extra button out of Engulf, but since they've had a couple of nerfs for Flameshaper Evokers instant heal onto that like primary target, I don't think you're getting quite as much output as you previously were, where I was like lay on handsing people with the Engulf. That's kind of to be expected, but I am liking where the spec is moving in that both Chrono Warden and Flameshaper feel pretty distinct on their own and have some slight ways that they're adjusting your output and adjusting your gameplay so that it feels like it's really noticeable that you're picking up one or the other. I don't think that this tier set does a really great job of sort of elevating any sort of gameplay. I feel like it's almost like chores of just keeping in the back of your mind every Verdant Embrace that you're trying to use that reversion on somebody else. I almost wish there was a way that like the Verdant Embrace could just be like cast on somebody without moving your character if you wanted to spec into it that way for a raid, because there's a lot of times for raid testing where I've gotten murdered through my own hubris of casting Verdant Embrace on somebody that I didn't look at where they were located. That's always been kind of a frustration for me with the spec playing it in raids, but I will say that in dungeons it felt really good. It's probably the highest tuned healer for damage and for healing. Like all of the healer checks and like difficult pulls that I was experiencing, like the Priory where there's just ridiculous amounts of damage in like the church and like the final wing, I felt like I was able to handle it regardless of what was coming my way. And so I think that the kit itself, the spec tree itself, is in very good shape, similar to where Mistweaver is at. And I think that especially for a dungeon environment, it feels very fluid to play. very fun to be able to set up your output in a variety of ways. Also, that Flame Shaper Renewing Blaze that you can cast on somebody else is insanely OP, and so I'm sure that's going to get nerfed. If we ever enter a world where tanks really need lots of healing all the time, that's gotta be like one of the most insane externals you could possibly give them. I was giving our Blood DK like 4 or 5 million extra healing every single cast at least, and that's about an entire health pool in the War Within beta terms. So it was feeling fantastic. I'm very excited to see what's going to be coming around the corner for raid testing and how some of these talent builds, especially some of the spec tree revamps that we've seen for a couple of the classes coming around, especially Evoker, are going to be playing out when we actually get the opportunity to do some more raid testing. So make sure you're subscribing to the channel if you haven't already, because we are going to be covering all of the healers throughout all of the War Within beta. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I hope you all enjoyed it, and I'll catch you all next time.